Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Room 592, where we unleash the truth. We have been meeting here every night, and we have offered prayers, we have criticized, constructively criticized, we have assessed and analyzed, we have called out the government on many occasions. We have also called out other political parties, including the opposition leader, on many occasions. But nothing trumps a continued barefaced rigging of a free and fair elections, and nothing will ever, I think, beat that in Guyana's history. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that for many decades, Guyana would have gone through so many problems, one type or another. We have had problems with corruption. We have had problems with corruption in government. We have had problems with elections. We have had problems with our border. Now, after so many years, we are still settling border issues. We've had problems with our economy. We've had problems with our people. But nothing, I think, not around the world are we going to find an election that has lasted for 119 days and counting. It's not over as yet. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to analyze these elections, this massive, maybe slowest rig ever, but certainly a rig, this massive attempt to remove the right of the electorate from their very own fingers. I don't think we'll find another country in the world, as I said. But as we continue to analyze this, we continue to bring on our guests into the program that we can have very open. We can agree, we can disagree, but very open, frank, unleash the truth. No spin zone here, ladies and gentlemen. And tonight, a gentleman who has been playing an active role all of his life within Guyanese politics, sometimes spinning, but many times being very assertive and being very, very, very open in asserting and putting a position that he knows and his conviction is that must represent the will of the electorate and the right thing to do. And there's been many times that Mr. Kit Nascimento, and many of us may have disagreed. He doesn't mind that we disagree with him. He is always open for constructive dialogue. And so tonight, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce to you Mr. Kit Nascimento. He's been a former minister of government, past government of Guyana. He has been one of those, I must say, who has been favored. Mr. Nascimento, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but he would have been favored by no other than Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. In terms of Mr. Burnham valued his advice, valued his opinion, and would have at that time, when you look around, ladies and gentlemen, he and colleagues like him would have contributed in one way or another to building a Guyana and also in helping to continue to build even after the Burnham era would have ended. So Kit Nascimento continued to serve the governments. I think he would have served the Chadijagan government or the government immediately thereafter. And his offer of advice and support has, and I know was extended to all the governments of Guyana. He is never shy to call it as it is. Kit, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Yog. It's a pleasure and an honor. And good evening to you and to all of our listeners.
Thank you, Kit. And if I may, ladies and gentlemen, just before I get into our discussion with Mr. Nascimento proper, let me just highlight to you a couple of things that happened today. Mr. Gildari has been the host of the 1:30 program, and I just quickly want to remind you that behind, sneakily, behind your back, very, very sneakily, the City Council of Georgetown has increased your rates by 10%. That was gazetted yesterday. Or was it today, Leonard? I think it was yesterday. It was gazetted yesterday. And ladies and gentlemen, they not only raised the rates by 10%, but they placed it retroactively to January 2017. A government that has no oil money, cannot access it, has killed sugar, has killed rice, has killed virtually the entire productive sector. The only thing that remains working is the extractive sector. That government has probably learned well how to extract, and that extraction is by taxes. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem, and we'll continue to assess it. I don't want to get that taxes into this discussion tonight, but I want to remind you also, Josh, if you're online, well done, Doc. Yourself and another colleague has taken criminal action against Keith Lowenfield. And using the word criminal, Kit, I want to come right at you. You, in a recent viewpoint, you use the word criminal in addressing some of the action undertaken during these elections. And you have been, I would not want to say harsh, maybe it wasn't harsh enough, but you were extremely outspoken in your views against what is happening. Your opening comments there, Chris, or Kit, in terms of your description of what this government has been doing and the rigging of this elections.
Well, first, let me also say good evening to Leonard.
Hi, good evening, Kit.
It's good to be on program with you. I've used the term criminal because that's exactly what it is. We've had two very significant developments recently, over the past 2 or 3 days. The first was Joe Harmon. Joe Harmon took to the radio in Antigua and on Bobby Vera's program and declared that the APNU AFC and this government will not accept the results of the elections, no matter what. This was followed last night by David Granger, who is still the country's president. David Granger went on the air and virtually endorsed every word that was spoken by his chief henchman, Joe Harmon, and made it plain for the very first time, because he's been hiding in the shadows, but for the very first time, on Bench Cup's program, Granger removed the disguise and made it plain to the people of this country, the majority of the people of this country, who voted his office, his government out of office on the 2nd of March, that he had no interest in their vote. Their behavior, as I said in my commentary, it's conniving, it's conspiratorial, it's evil, it's ignorant, and it is criminally indecent. It began, of course, when we had the elections on the 2nd of March. Those elections were observed around the democratic world and by our local observers, one of whom I was privileged to be, to have been efficiently, properly, and credibly conducted on election day. The criminality began the morning after election day, when the statements of polls made it plain that the APNO AFC government had been defeated at the polls by some 15,000 votes. Every single political party contesting that election, by the middle of the day after the election was held, that had the SOPs in their hands, public documents that were declared, every single major observing group that had those documents in their hand knew perfectly well that the government had lost the elections to the People's Progressive Party, see. The government itself, the coalition government, had those SOPs. They knew they had lost the elections, and they wasted no time. By the middle of the next day after the elections, to implement a plan to avoid admitting to their loss and rigging the system to put themselves back into office. I saw this with my naked eyes because I was an observer present when Clement Mengo first refused to tabulate the Region 4 results from the SOPs. We went through this, now news, 2 or 3 times with the courts ordering Mengo to do the proper thing, which he refused to do.
Right.
I saw at that time, and this is important, I saw at that time, and I observed at that time, that Keith Lowenfield was directing Mengo. Even then, it became obvious. And Lowenfield has been a major player in this deliberate, naked, ugly attempt to rig these elections and deny the voters their rights. And that is why I have become so intimately involved in trying to expose this fraud. You mentioned earlier that I was a minister in the government of the People's National Congress. And yes, indeed, I was. In fact, I was minister in the office of the Prime Minister first, and then when Forbes Burnham became minister, but became president, I became minister in the office of the president. I advised Forbes directly. My office was next door to his. So I have played a major part in the People's National Congress. And I'm here tonight thoroughly ashamed that it's this same party today that is attempting, in a world today which is very different to the world then, to once again impose a government on this country that was not elected by its people. And I will oppose that, and I'm here tonight because of that.
Thank you, Kit. And Leonard, Kit has he was with us on another program, if you recall, and
Yes.
unfortunately, they I think we had a poor internet connection.
Mhm.
Kit, indeed, harking back to the days of the 1970s, 1980s, I'm glad that you mentioned that one cannot anymore compare the PNC of days old to now. Sir, would you attempt to compare the PNC you would have known its empties to now?
No, I certainly would not. And we did function in an entirely different world. In fact, Guyana then was part of a Cold War
Hmm.
battle
That is true.
for world freedom. What we did then was largely influenced
Hmm.
and regulated by that Cold.
Correct. And Kid, the reason I asked you about that was, I was chatting with some younger persons and advising them that in Burnham's days, um, he had some friends. Leonard, I don't know if you would remember this from your history lessons. He had Barrow, he had Bear. They were known as the three Bs,
Hans
and
Barrow. Hans Barrow.
and he certainly, and if you recall the instrumentality of CARICOM itself and CARIFESTA, my point here, Kit, is that even though those days cannot be compared, Burnham being what he was, he had friends across the Caribbean. But here you have a President Granger that stands absolutely alone, not a friend in the world. Kit, now it seems like Mr. Barajaglia seems to have so much money because they're saying Mercury has bought out every single person in the CARICOM. Kit,
You know,
has Mercury also bought you out?
you know, ever since I've been involved in politics at an international level, one political party or the other has engaged the services of overseas lobbyists and overseas consultants to influence the larger countries in the world. That is nothing new, and it's nothing unusual. And in this particular case, the People's Progressive Party have used the services of Mercury, and APNU AFC have used the services of another less well-respected lobbying firm in Washington, one, in fact, which has a rather suspect reputation.
Mhm.
But it is laughable to suggest that anything that is occurring today in Guyana has anything to do with what the lobbying firms in Washington were hired to do. What's happening here is plain and simple a governing coalition that has refused to acknowledge and accept that they have been credibly defeated at the polls. So they have indulged in every conceivable means of avoiding that truth.
Mhm.
But they have been caught out from the very beginning. We had the US being represented here by the Carter Center. We had the Canadian, the UK, the European, the British diplomatic community represented here as observers. We've had the Organization of American States.
American States, right?
We've had the Commonwealth.
Hmm.
And don't talk to me about that, these white people country. The Commonwealth do not represent white people. They represent the group of African, Caribbean, and Asian states. The Organization of American States does not represent the United States of America. It represents the whole of Latin America. And collectively, including, let us not forget, collectively, the very beginning, when this fraudulent attempt to rig the election results was exposed, they collectively condemned it. And they have done much more than that. They've made it very plain Dr. Granger and his group that should they succeed, and God hope that they don't succeed in returning themselves to government illegally and improperly and fraudulently, they will bring down on our country so much damage, not merely to themselves, but the country as a whole. That they will never, ever, in my view, find themselves elected again. Can you imagine that the entire banking system of this world, at least the world that we mainly function in, is commanded by the United States of America? Can you imagine us being unable to do any business at all when the sanctions come down?
Right.
This massive oil wealth off our shores, ready to be developed and to make us the richest country in the world per capita. Do you think that Granger and his group would access $1 single of that for our country? It is unbelievable and very difficult for me and intelligent people to comprehend what in the name of heaven they think they're doing.
So Kit, before we get to the the next step for them, I mean, I just want to put this in perspective, or I want you to put it in perspective. It is obvious to this country that APNU AFC has shifted the goalposts. Many days ago we won these. 119 days ago we won these elections. 118 days ago, no, we are not giving our SOPs. 117 days ago, we're not going to accept anything. 116, 115 days ago, Mingo declared. 100 days ago, Mingo did his second declaration. They've always, and the narrative, Kit, you are a PR consultant. Their narrative has not been consistent. Their narrative has been so varied that every successive narrative has shown their previous lie. As a PR consultant, as well as a politician, what did that tell you from the beginning when they were changing their weekly narratives?
Well, let me tell you this, Yogi. One of the very first things I do with all my clients, no matter how difficult the challenge is to whatever the public relations happen to be, I say to them, you do not lie. You never lie. If you lie, you will be found out.
Correct.
And because they have begun with the biggest possible lie you can commit, and that is denying a free and fair election in your country, and then trying to spin a story that that's not true. It is such a massive lie that every other day you get caught out. You get found out to be lying. Last night, for instance, I was appalled. I tell you, my blood ran cold, and I do not exaggerate. When I heard David Granger have the effrontery to lie on radio about the CARICOM report. He was fed a question because the whole interview was planned and programmed, obviously. And let me say that nobody planned this interview with me. I have no idea what you're going to ask.
York, did you pay him?
I can't. Kit is beyond the reach of our pocket. Don't worry. He's a very expensive consultant to hire.
Yes, I am, because
Sorry.
I'm going.
Sorry, Kit.
But
so last night, Kit,
we
sorry
watched. Let me finish this point.
Go on.
We watched Granger get asked a question by Benskop about, well, what about, is probably the only reasonable question Benskop asked, the CARICOM report. Do you know that Granger never once referred to anything that was important in that report? I have the report with me, and I would like to, as we proceed, read some of the 2 or 3 points of the CARICOM report, observations of that report, that Granger completely ignored. All he could do is talk about what the report said with regard to the need in the future to reorganize our electoral process. We do need to reorganize it. In fact, we need to completely dismantle DCOM and the way it's structured, and to begin again where that is concerned. And we need probably, in due course, to prosecute every one of the thieves in the DCOM secretariat, beginning with Mr. Lowenfield. But you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, well, yes. Thanks for raising Mr. Lowenfield's name, because let's leave that one. Let me come to what you just raised. So Josh Kanhai and others have initiated criminal action against Lowenfield, and yes, and they have they're alleging willful misconduct. You remember that phrase, Leonard? Willful misconduct, breach of public trust, misconduct in public office contrary to common law, and conspiracy to commit felony. Now, the last one is especially interesting. To prove a conspiracy, you will have to identify the conspirators. So it is interesting that you raise this thing, that the criminal action that should be taken. Over to you, Kit.
My wife is telling me that you couldn't see my picture properly. Can you see me now?
This is much better. Yes.
Okay. I'm using my phone.
Okay.
So my hand gets a little tired from time to time.
Yes.
You know, I am over the age of 80.
You are? You look younger than Yoga myself.
Thank you for flattering me.
Yes, Kit. So this criminal action has been filed today against Keith Lowenfield. Your comments?
Well, I'm glad it's been filed. The Private Sector Commission issued a statement recently, which they accused him of criminal malfeasance. And that, in fact, is what he's done. I mean, Lowenfield has literally disenfranchised by inventing a set of figures. You can't describe it in any other way. By inventing a set of figures. To come to a conclusion that APNU and AFC have won the election. He not only did it once, he did it twice. In fact, he's done it 3 times. Because if you back up, when Mango presented his fraudulent tabulation, Lowenfield embraced it and put it into his first report that he ever presented to the chairman of DCOM. That report she correctly put in abeyance. I say correctly because had it been me, I would have thrown it out at the time I received it. But that's the first time Lowenfield associated himself with a set of rigged results.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then, when he was required under the law to submit his report to the commission, his first report to the commission, in which he correctly and accurately, because he had no choice, enumerated the recount
Mm-hmm.
figures, he then took on board so-called unproved, undocumented, unevidenced set of claims about absentee voters, dead people voting,
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of documents not supposed to be there.
Correct.
Took those reports and gave the commission a set of new figures for which he had no authority to do. And then the third occasion, the chairman, Claudette Singh, Justice Claudette Singh,
Mhm.
writes him a letter. I think it was on the 16th of June, directing in very specific terms that he must submit his final report, which takes the results of the elections, that is the recounted elections, and allocates the seats to the various parties on the basis of that report. First, he refused and disobeyed her instructions to present the report on the specious excuse and the unlawful excuse that the matter was before the Court of Appeal.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the Court of Appeal had suspended for 3 days their decision. And in any event, never gave Lowenfield any directions whatsoever as to how he was to behave or not behave. But he used that as an excuse and a reference to submitting yet a third set of numbers. This time he was more generous to the PPP. Instead of knocking off 60%, he reduced it to 25%. But with one single objective in mind: present a set of false figures, which then the APNU AFC hierarchy have climbed on board and claimed they won the elections. Should he be prosecuted? He most certainly should. And I'm
Right.
sure will.
Correct. And to our viewers and listeners out there, just to remind you that as of this afternoon, as of today, actually, criminal action, the filing of such criminal action against Keith Lowenfield would have been initiated. Among the alleged charges or among the alleged actions is one for conspiracy. And just to let you know, in terms, I mean, our legal team will advise us when they're here in tomorrow night's room 592, of course. But just to let you know, in conspiracy, the court is always interested in an element of intent and whether an action has been committed or not. Conspiracy is the planning, is the intent to commit an action. And so the legal filings, Leonard, I've read it very carefully because it is interesting. So the conspiracy that has to involve more than one person, of course, more than one person,
Uh-huh.
as well as the acts that they have engaged in, like the willful act, the willful misrepresentation, and stuff like that. It is interesting, and it would be interesting to see how quickly the courts can deal with these. But I think the entire country has breathed a sigh of relief with this initial action being taken by against Keith Lowenfield. Wouldn't you say, Leonard?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not supposed to be breathing a sigh of relief here. I'm supposed to be standing on the fence. But let me ask you back a question, and maybe
Hmm.
to Mr. Nascimento and yourself.
You got to be careful when you stand on the fence. The fence can bore you. But anyway, go on.
Yes, unfortunately,
Yeah,
that's a
it could be
that's.
very
I know what Kit is going to say, but I want to ask
uncomfortable.
you, and I'd
If
love.
you sit on,
Go ahead, Kit. Go
no,
ahead.
you go ahead. You want to ask a question?
Yeah. So here's a question. This is filed now. Is this likely to have any impact on the carrying out of his work? What he has to do, his job constitutionally? Well, it's not constitutionally anymore. His job towards GCOM that he's mandated to do. Is this private criminal charge going to have any impact on it?
Well, he is not. He is not in the court's eye. Kit can comment here, but he's not guilty until so proven. He's innocent until proven guilty, and that doesn't stop him. And there is no injunction filed to stop him from continuing to function as he ought to function. The problem we have, Leonard, is Lowenfield. Kit, this is for you now, because Lowenfield seems to have his own notion outside of the law as to what his functions should be, and that is where the bigger problem is. Kit?
Yeah, I don't think the court case matters at all.
Mm-hmm.
Quite it may matter later, but it doesn't matter now.
Uh-huh.
What matters now is that Lowenfield is in violation of the directions of the chairman of the Elections Commission. He has disobeyed her, and he's in violation of the law. Lowenfield is a contracted employee of GCO. He has no constitutional status of any kind. He can, in fact, be fired by GCOM.
Kit, just stick a pin. He's also in violation of the Court of Appeals stay. The Court of Appeals gave a stay for 3 days. Go on.
Yes, I mentioned that earlier on, if you
Yes.
remember.
Yes,
that
that's
he,
true.
that he was.
Mhm.
But more importantly, he's in violation of the directions of GCOM. And he still has to provide the chairman with a report that she has directed him to provide her with.
Mhm.
And if he doesn't, he's in violation of the law. He's in violation of his contractual obligations to GCOM. And it is up to GCOM to deal with that, to use a word that Mr. Burnham used to use, condignly and quickly and rapidly. Because, you know, all of these court cases, and let me stress this, matter not at all. The Court of
So,
Appeal issued
go on.
absolutely no directions with regard to how you determine whether a vote is credible or not.
Mhm.
They issued no instructions to Mr. Lowenfield or, in that matter, to anybody.
Correct.
The appeal to the CCJ, while it may be useful and it is important, will again ultimately do no more than question whether the Court of Appeal had a right to hold the case or not,
Mhm.
and probably will throw it out. And that will remove this fancy language about credible votes.
Mhm.
In fact, the only way a vote can be discredited is at the ballot box. You can't discredit a vote that is legally cast and put in the ballot box. And the laws and regulations that govern elections define exactly what is and what is not a credible vote. Votes which are not credible are those which are not properly stamped, marked, and signed and put in the ballot box.
Mm-hmm.
And there were very, very few of those in the recount. So every single ballot that has been counted and signed off by all of the participating parties, and indeed signed off by GCOM itself, are absolutely credible.
Yes.
And cannot be labeled otherwise.
Yes.
And if Mr. Lowenfield disregards that fact and continues to produce a set of bogus results, court case or no court case, the GCOM Commission must demand of him that he performs his job.
Mm-hmm.
And if he doesn't, they have the means of dealing with it. And we would expect they will.
Yeah. Kit, if I may, let me refer to Granger's speech or his interview last night.
Yes,
among the many things that, before we get down to the heavier stuff, among the many things that happened last night was, I would deem it as a flailing attempt to get a retired Major General Joe Singh. I mean, I found it absurd that the head of state gets into a discussion with an interviewer, and he sought to bring into the discussion Mr. Joe Singh, who would have been his colleague in the army. Any comments there? What would have been your thoughts when you saw the discussion get down to that level, Kit?
My thought was it was an ugly piece of attempted character assassination and had no place in the interview.
Mm-hmm.
And was totally irrelevant to whether we have a free and fair election or don't.
Exactly. You hit it right there, because it had nothing to do with these elections. And Kit, over the past week, coming one after the other, we would have seen announcements of changes within the army. We would have seen from Granger's speech last night, he fully intends to, or he thinks he will be sworn in, or he wants to be sworn in. The words he used about Granger and about Lowenfield and his report were directory. They were not suggestive. They were just directory, as if here is this man instructing Lowenfield that this is what the report is, and it is what it is.
Well, I'm glad you raised that, because in his typical dishonest fashion, Granger continues to repeat the mantra that he is not interfering in GCOM. Yet last night, he did exactly that. He instructed an employee of GCOM as to what he must and must not do, and how to do it. And he went on to say that GCOM are under an obligation to accept what Lowenfield presented.
Yes.
So in fact, Granger went ahead not only to direct Lowenfield, but to direct the commission itself, and indeed the chairman, as to what they and she must do and not do. And that is not interference in the affairs of GCOM. You know, a long time ago, a month or so ago, I described Mr. Granger as a hypocrite. And the ministry of the presidency wrote me a nasty letter condemning. How could I say that of this man who campaigns on the basis of honesty and integrity? Well, I did invite them to sue me, and unfortunately they didn't, because it would have been very interesting getting Mr. Granger in the box.
Mm-hmm.
But what was frightening is Granger's belief that he could lie and misrepresent so much of what is known to the rest of the world and believe that he can get away with it. Which brings me to your question about the chief of staff and the appointments in the military. We are on the cusp of a sitting government attempting to hold on to power illegally on the belief, I think, that they have that they can do it because they have the support of the security forces. And I think that they're grossly misguided. I can say this because we've seen it, that this has not been the finest hour of the Commissioner of Police. And much that the police have done have revealed a bias, almost criminal, in favor of the skullduggery of the afternoon AFC. But there are good policemen and bad policemen. One good policeman got fired for being a good policeman. But the army is another matter. Both the army and the police are sworn to an oath of allegiance, not to the president, but to the Constitution. We have always had good and credible army officers in this country. Indeed, my brother was one of them. And I believe that any attempt to interfere in, manipulate, or use the military to keep an illegal government in office will fall flat on its face. Right. Mr. Granger will soon discover that if he continues along the way he is.
Right. Kit, just to stay a little bit on the police and army and so forth, the commissioner of police has been under the spotlight since he would have tendered a report to the chairman of GCOM of these persons who were supposedly out of the country, which even the newspapers would have rubbished in a great part. What's your thought about what's the reliability factor there then?
Well, he's the chief immigration officer, and he got asked a question which I believe the chairman of GCOM was wrong to ask and stepped out of a crease in doing so.
Mm-hmm.
And he presented it with a set of figures that he couldn't possibly document and proved to be false.
Yeah. But how much does that set back in your mind as putting on your PR cap? The confidence of the public into record keeping by the police and the immigration people and so forth.
Well, you know, for many years I was engaged, and I might tell you, free of charge,
Mm-hmm.
to work with the police on their public relations. And I worked with many of the senior officers, including the one who happens to be Commissioner of Police at the moment.
Okay.
But I think that their public relations is in the garbage heap at the moment, and his in particular.
So, as you on that issue of public relation, Mr. Nascimento, is how would you say that public relations, proper PR would have been one of the big issues facing this coalition in the last 5 years?
Well,
I want you to answer it.
I hesitate to criticize what people may consider to be fellow professionals, but whoever managed the government, the APNO AFC public relations, was not very good at it. Let me put it that way.
But it is a public relations firm. Well, it was one of those firms that they employ that actually lent them the term honesty and integrity. I mean that.
Well, you know what I said about lying.
Kit, let us go to what you see from your seat, from your vantage point. What is going to happen on Thursday and Friday of this week? As I think we all know that the CCJ's case really does not matter to an election and its declaration. It's a matter of them challenging the bifurcation, as Mr. Nandlal put it, of the section of the law. It does not tie Lowenfield's hands in advising the commission. And of course, it does not tie, that is providing the CCJ lifts all the stays in place, does not tie the commission from proceeding. Tomorrow aside, what does Kit Nascimento see as an option or a potential thing happening on Thursday and Friday of this week? Are we likely to get to a stage of a declaration this week?
Absolutely, yes, we have to. In that, I agree with Mr. Granger. We are close to a declaration.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, the CCJ has frozen the operations of GCOM and Lowenfield. They can do nothing. They have been injuncted while the court case is proceeding. So until such time as the court case is settled, and that we expect to be something like Monday next week, there will be no movement on the part of the chairman of GCOM. There will be no meetings. There will be no activity.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment the court case is finished and that injunction is removed from GCOM, it becomes the immediate responsibility of Justice Singh to give firm directions to the Chief Elections Officer to submit to her the allocation of the seats based on the recount.
Mm-hmm.
If he refuses to do that, she has within her authority full force of the law to get rid of him.
Mhm.
She has to immediately call a meeting of the commission. Well, we know exactly where the APNU AFC commissioners are going to go and what they're going to do. They've done it all the time. They're nothing more than employees of Granger.
Mhm.
And they see themselves and their jobs in there as part
Mhm.
of the activity to rig the elections.
But Kit, your
So
presumption,
just let
your
me finish my
sure.
thought.
Mhm.
There will be a vote, and the vote will be cast by the chairman of the Elections Commission. And there is no doubt in my mind, as the judge she is, with the reputation that she has, with the world looking on and over her shoulder, that she will declare a legal government based on the recount and move to a swearing in.
Mhm.
And that will happen quite quickly. And
Thank you.
it will not be Mr. Granger that gets sworn in.
What
Okay.
my question, very quickly, Yog, if I can, to Mr.
Mhm.
Nascimento.
Sure.
Uh, what gives you confidence that would make you say that the president will concede? Because we have statements coming out recently, as late as this week, that
He won't concede.
pardon.
He wouldn't.
He will not concede.
And so, what happens then?
Well, that is the most important question that you've asked me tonight.
Go right ahead. I want you to explore it for us.
What will Granger and company do when they are faced with a declaration from GCOM that they have lost the election and the chairman of GCOM moves to have Mr. Mohammed Irfan Ali sworn in as new president? What will they do? What will they say to their supporters whom they've been misleading and lying to? How will they manage them? How will they control them? Or will they go the next step and refuse to demit office? We can only hope that ultimately common sense, if not good sense, prevails.
Mhm.
And Granger will understand that it would be a fruitless, and as I said earlier on in this interview, a horribly damaging and destructive exercise to maintain a military dictatorship in this country.
Mhm.
And a loss of lives is bound to follow.
Mhm. But Kit,
Does Mr. Granger want to go to his grave with that on his conscience?
Mhm.
I ask him that question.
Well, he doesn't seem to care anymore, does he? I mean, with every passing day, he has recommitted himself to the goings on. I don't know if he's directed to or what, but he has certainly openly recommitted himself to not uh, give up power. I mean, and that is, as you rightly say, that is the serious question. That if Irfan Ali is declared, or when Irfan Ali is declared, whether Granger will then demit and get out because he's no longer the president.
Well, that is when we will know whether or not we have a professional army or not, should that happen.
Mhm.
Because Efan Ali would then be the president, and the army are sworn under the Constitution to be loyal to the elected president,
Mhm.
insofar as the maintenance of law and the rule of law is concerned.
Mhm. And Kit,
That's from you know.
if I may ask you directly, what at this point does Mr. Kit Nascimento think that when Irfan Ali is declared that Granger will demit office?
As I said before, if not good sense, common sense will tell me has to.
Thank you.
You might want to ask me, what would Mr. Harmon and some of those crazy people he has around him do? They are far less predictable. And that is the danger we face.
Mhm. They are far less predictable. Indeed. I want to take you back to something you said a couple of minutes ago. When how confident, or what is your in your mind, what's your confidence level that Lowenfield will not be like a recurring decimal here and do the same thing the second time around? What confidence do you have that at that point in time, the chairman will then take decisive action to either replace Lowenfield or to take such action as to get the right figure um, without any challenges?
I think my confidence is based fundamentally on who the chairman is. At the end of the day, she is a justice of the peace. At the end of the day, she has earned herself a considerable reputation in the world of jurisprudence. At the end of the day, she has her own reputation and dignity to be concerned about. And at the end of the day, if she doesn't, she too would be subject to sanction.
True. Kit, have you do you have in any point in your history, give me your immense reading of worldwide events. Have you ever seen a situation that we have here, not with regards to the elections, but the alienation of supporters of a party by its leaders, as what is happening here?
Not sure I follow your question.
Well, a majority of the supporters, a majority of the people who voted for APNU AFC in these last elections would have so voted. Subsequent to the voting day, the narratives have changed so much. I mean, we have had people calling into the program and say, I voted, but this is not what I wanted. With every passing excuse of APNU AFC, they're alienating the right-minded and the right thinkers of their own party.
Yes, what has been a major disappointment to me is that many of those persons have remained silent.
Yes.
They are good people in APNU AFC. They're decent people, many of them my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them perhaps not my friends anymore. But we
And
have to recognize a reality here. And it's a massive elephant in the room. And it's in our room too.
mm-hmm.
That
Yep,
the electoral division in this country is fundamentally based on race.
correct.
And that there are many good people who allow themselves not to think about the consequences of their country, but allow themselves to be influenced by the preference of their race. That has been one of the saddest and ugliest parts of our history since we became independent. And
Hmm.
it is the cause of a great deal of what is happening.
Yes.
That
Kit,
perhaps is my best answer to you.
yeah. Kit, again, with the point of the Madam Chairman taking such actions as would be necessary, because in this case now, we can either fall completely over the precipice, we could get into that abyss, or we can be saved. And unfortunately, it might be up to the chairman to do so. It needn't be like this, Kit. And a lot of persons are saying that unfortunately, Madam Chairman has been pushed and pushed and pushed into a corner, one after the other, by APNU AFC, and it's not been good to have her in that spot. My point and my question to you is as follows. Supporters of APNU AFC are saying now that the commission has no voice. They have to take the report from the CEO and use that report.
That's garbage.
Thank you. And I want to, before you comment further, I want to remind viewers and listeners, as Kit would explain just now, expand on this. I want to remind you all that Commissioner Vincent Alexander, a couple of weeks ago in room 592, had said to the population that he had caused to challenge Gokul Budu's submission to the commission, and Gokul Budu had to go back and bring another submission. So there is precedence that the commission, at the commission level, had intervened. Kate, over to you.
Absolutely. That is the president. And Alexander was very much part of it. As a matter of fact, as far as I know, what they did is that Gokul admitted he was wrong, and they both sat down and penciled in new figures and used those figures written in by themselves as the basis for their declaration. But that is not going to happen this time.
uh, Kit, what's the likelihood? Again, I'm pushing some hypothetical scenarios at you. What's the likelihood that the government commissioners, a meeting will be summoned by the chairman, the government commissioners will not turn up to that meeting, which is going to push it back another 24 hours again? What's the likelihood of that happening, sir?
I think very likely it will happen.
Mm-hmm.
But it won't really matter.
So we may be looking then, Kit, if one were to take all of these things into play, Leonard, we are looking at next weekend then, because they have to go and come, and then Lowenfield would have to do his thing, and then, who knows? I mean, I don't say this in a negative way. Who knows how Lowenfield might be affected by this court case now? So there are many things at play here, and Leonard, your elections watch and so forth has to get a longer life, even, my friend.
Well, I hope not. I hope that they could come and we could start talking community development or something like that, and take some calls on
Hmm.
that. But if I'm to make a prediction, I would say I see another court case looming, and that is what I was advised, that when this come back, there is going to be a more than likely Lowenfield is not going to want to do something, and then there's going to be a court case because he is going to refuse, and they're probably going to move him and or attempt to remove him, and then he's going to go to court, and so we are going to be heading there. And that is one scenario that I'm at least looking at, and I believe that we will be going back to the CCJ.
Hmm.
Uh, I, I, I am not a lawyer, so I'm not going to stick my neck out here on this one. But
Hmm.
it is my understanding that once a declaration is made by DCOM, it cannot be challenged in court other than a petition, an election petition.
Okay. Got you. Kit, with regards to the immediate things that ought to happen then, given your experience in the field in politics and as well as PR, immediately, given also Granger's statements last night, there is an opportunity ahead then that APNU AFC could still corral, could still start sending a message of change to its supporters, knowing that it lost. Is there in your mind a likelihood that it will do so? Or is it going to wait for the ball to drop and then say, hey, it wasn't us, GCOM rigged these elections for the PPP?
Left to Mr. Harmon, the latter will be the case. Mr. Harmon is not going to back down on the lies that he's been telling. Mr. Harmon is going to have to look for somewhere to run to.
And in terms of the immediate picture for a new government that will be sworn in, how, let's say number 1 to 10, let us put 1 to 10, priority number 1 being the highest and most important, of course. How important is constitutional reform, and what would Kit want to see as the first kind of constitutional reform that needs to be put in place? We're seeking your professional help for free here. You know, we got to take advantage of that.
You mean you are denying me the opportunity to be hired for a good fee to advise the Constitutional Reform Committee?
This is pro
That's
bono.
very unfair to
Yes, Kit. How much priority would you give constitutional reform in a 1 to 10? 1 being of greatest priority.
Well, it's not merely constitutional reform. You have to begin by reforming the entire electoral system. You have to begin by dismantling GCOM. But you do need constitutional reform, yes. We've needed it for many years. We've moved in the direction of it. Unfortunately, whichever government is in power suddenly forgets the need to do it. APNU promised it as a major part of their manifesto. They never delivered on it, didn't even try to deliver on it. The PPP, to their credit, delivered on some part of it, but then did not complete it.
Is there a limit to the number of criminal charges, private criminal charges that can be filed against Mr. Lowenfield or any other persons of GCOM as may see fit by the people of Guyana?
My only answer to that would be, I hope it's enough for them to put him in jail.
But Kit, add to your consideration for answer would be, add to that would be your comment for a call for a complete, full commission of inquiry into GCOM for the 2020 elections.
Oh, I think that's inevitable, That's inevitable. That will happen. But you know, any such inquiry, if the PPPC are smart about it, should be conducted with expertise brought in from outside of the country, so as to relieve it from any taint of political bias.
Should Guyana be worried, gentlemen, that tomorrow there's going to be the timing of the swearing of a new army chief acting, and that's going to be done as early as tomorrow?
Yeah, what about the timing there? Huh?
I believe that what is happening there is very wrong. In the current circumstances that the country finds itself, I think it is appalling that the Chief of Staff should take his leave on retirement at this time and a brand new Chief of Staff be appointed in the interim. It reeks, unfortunately, of suspicion. It totally undermines confidence in the independence and credibility of the army in these current circumstances. It is a horribly bad public relations
Mhm.
thing to do.
And especially when one considers the on the other side in the police force itself, the commissioner
Yes, I
of
saw that.
police,
I saw that. I saw that.
yeah, has I think accumulated between the commissioner and the assistant is over 500 days or something like that. And they're not going off.
Well, exactly. I mean, you have to ask yourself, and you can't help asking yourself, and the nation is asking itself, what in the name of heaven is going on here? That is why I say that where it may not be anything untoward, it
Hmm.
certainly leads to a serious discussion about the credibility of what we see happening and
Hmm.
why it's happening. And it's most unfortunate. And it's destabilizing at this particular point in time. It's a very irresponsible decision that has been made by Granger.
Hmm. Hmm. So, Kit, a couple nights ago, last week, Friday, in fact, we had former President Donald Ramatar, and I asked him a particular question, and I would
He's
want
my good friend.
and I would want to ask you the same question with regards to. I mean, no disrespect to either you or David Granger when I say this, but you, at some stage, you guys would have been either political or colleagues, one way or another. Um, what is Kit Nascimento's advice for a colleague or a former colleague that is now the incumbent outgoing president of Guyana?
I'm having a little difficulty understanding that. What is the relationship to your question,
What
Ramata?
message what concise message would a Kit Nascimento advise David Granger at now today?
Given what he has done and what he is attempting to do,
Yes.
get down on his knees and pray to God for forgiveness.
Okay. Get down on your knees and pray to God. Indeed. And Kit, in terms of let us talk about the country. The country obviously has been reeling, and this is not related to COVID, with the sheer political gamesmanship. How much of a challenge will the healing be for the next government?
Huge, manifestly huge. The last job in the world that I would want would be the next president of Ghana.
Hmm.
Very difficult indeed, massive challenge. Very great efforts are going to have to be made to cross the divide that we've created in this election standoff. It is a massive challenge. First and foremost is we have to begin to recover the fact that we're not African, Indian, Portuguese, Amerindian, or Chinese, or some mix of that. That is not who we are. We are first and foremost descendants who have become Guyanese. And apart from the Amerindians, none of us have come to this country voluntarily.
Hmm.
And all of us have come to this country in some form of servitude or another. And all of us only have one destiny, either flee our country or remain in it and build it.
Hmm.
And we have to start thinking that way.
Right.
That is the only way we have to start thinking. We haven't done that since we become independent because our politics is on race. The power base of our major political parties, from the time we became independent, and we are all familiar with the history of it, from the time of the split between Burnham and Jagan, that is what has happened to us.
Correct.
Constitutional change will help that. But much more important than constitutional change is attitudinal change. Let us decide who we are. Are we Guyanese? Or are we something else? I know who I am, and I know who I always have been.
And Kit, when Mr. Ramotar was in this position as an outgoing president, I believe that the private sector commission, of which you were a part, you played a role in advising Mr. Ramotar to concede, and I think he acted upon it. Why aren't you playing that role now? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, because Mr. Ramotar had his door open. Mr. Granger has his door firmly shut. He's locked himself away from any rational or regional approach.
Has the private sector reached out?
Yes, many times.
And my last question to you on that same point here, Kit, because we're going to get down to program time. The private sector has reached out. The current incumbent views the private sector commission with some degree of maybe you guys are not loyal or some degree of suspicion. Is it that there is a barrier that would have caused this distrust or mistrust? And what did the private sector commission, from your perspective, your vantage point, do to try to gain that trust and to help the government that they could have trusted you?
I believe, since I've been an active member of the private sector executive, and even before, that we've maintained a position of principle on the things that matter in a society. The maintenance of law and order, most especially, good governance, fair governance, recognition of the rights of the people of the country, and of course, the building of an economy which is going to provide employment and good wages and salaries. That's a private sector priority.
Correct.
Always was, is, and always should be. But private sectors invariably find themselves, for one reason or another, at one time or another, on the opposite side of the government of the day. And it is much a responsibility of the government of the day to reach out to the private sector as it is for the private sector to reach out to the government.
Well said. Well said. And Kit, we have 2 minutes to go for wrap-up time. What would be your closing comments, sir?
I suppose I can only say that democracy prevails, that we overcome this horrific attempt to steal the people's vote, that we elect the president who the people chose to be their president. We move forward, hopefully, and eventually, as a united country and take enormous advantage of the wealth that is lying offshore. Let's do that. Do it before I die. I only have a few more years to live. I'd like to see that happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Kit Nascimento. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a discussion with Mr. Kit Nascimento, former advisor to the government, various governments of Guyana, and of course, a former minister of a government of Guyana. It has been great to have a frank and open discussion with Mr. Nascimento, who is a PR consultant, and I can tell you, he is good at what he does. He's also been a mainstay within the private sector commission and has always, taken the side of speaking out and speaking out for what he believes in. Leonard, tomorrow we are going to have Elections Watch, and I just want you to, remind our viewers what's up for tomorrow, because I do know that you would want to cut in and out depending on the feed from the CCJ.
Yes, the feed I understand. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Yog Mahadio. The feed for that is going to be starting early in the morning, I understand. And so we are going to be for the 1:30. Let's see how it goes, but we're going to bring you up to date as to what has happened. And I think in the evening too, but we're going to be with you at 1:30 to bring you a wrap up, or if you want to bring a roundup of what has transpired in the court. But what is going to happen tomorrow is the oral arguments in that CCJ case. And I think room 592 is probably where we bring on some legal minds to give you
Correct.
some analysis of the day's play. So over to you, Yog.
Indeed. Indeed. Thank you for that. And yes, Kit.
Yog and Leonard, I want to thank you very much for having me, and I want to thank our audience for having listened to us.
Thank you so much, Kit. And we'll certainly be in touch, because I would still like to do a discussion with you one day after these elections are over and done with, to share some of your experiences of the 1970s and 1980s, if you don't mind, sir. Before you get the book written, we want to talk to you. We're looking forward.
I've always been receptive to the media.
Thank you, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow indeed you will join us on Kaiser Radio as we look to bring you the feed from the CCJ. And I must tell you that tomorrow night we already have invited and gotten a response from Mr. Sanjeev Dattadin to join us in room 592 to discuss the day's events at the CCJ. We will continue to assess what's happening. We do know that Elections Watch under Mr. Leonard Gildari and room 592 with yours truly and Mr. Gildari will continue to bring you the updates, the analysis, and of course, every other detail that might be happening pertaining to these elections and where we go as a people. Ladies and gentlemen, as we wrap up tonight's program, I wish to remind you all, politics is what it is. I wish to remind you all again, as I did last night, this country is yours, is ours, is all of us put together as a people. When we allow the politicians, when we allow, like what is happening presently, to split us apart as a people, we're also allowing years of divisiveness. Let us put it to rest. The politicians are going to find a way to get along. They're going to coexist in the National Assembly. They are going to find a way to get along. You and I need to find a way to overcome these challenges now and not wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, also, let's remember our children will be undertaking their first exams. And that is a very, very important day. While we are concentrated on politics, the children will be wearing masks for the first time and writing an exam, which will be making their challenge even so much tougher. But they are our children. They're Guyanese children, and they're, of course, ready for any challenges. So our prayers with our children for tomorrow, and certainly we hope that the judges and the members of the various panels and the political parties and their representatives at the CCJ stay in good health as we continue to pray, of course, for the good health of the president and the head of all the political parties, as well as the Elections Commission, and of course, our dear good friend, Mr. Kit Nascimento. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you here in room 592 once again. Do stay safe, and when you can, Do a prayer for this lovely country of ours. Bye bye now.